A 7-year-old boy stopped breathing in a hospital that almost let him die. The mansion was dark when Kang Tae-min ran the last hallway. Ji-hoon's pajama shirt was soaked, the little chest pulled for air that wasn't coming. Tae-min, the man they called the Silent Dragon, went to his knees. He held that small hand like it was the only thing keeping him alive. "Listen, K-fam, I do nails inside houses like his every week. I know what a mafia father looks like when he can't fix something with money. The whole man, broken, girl." Min-jun drove. The private hospital took the boy in under a fake name. White corridors. A doctor shrugged. Probably a virus. That's when she walked past. Dr. Zendaya Murphy. Black, beautiful, slender curves under that long white coat. Hair pinned in a low bun. Stethoscope around her neck. The only black pediatrician on the floor. She saw Ji-hoon's chest and crossed the corridor in 3 steps. Get him to assessment, now. She didn't know who his father was. She didn't know the dragon tattoo climbing the silent dragon's neck. She didn't know a man was watching her through a video call, gripping the phone until the glass cracked, finally breathing for the first time that night. She just saw a child who needed to breathe. But what she did over the next 3 years, quietly, off the clock, for free, I never saw that one coming, K-fam. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Ji-hoon's chest pulled in once and stopped pulling on the second. Kang Tae-min saw the pause from the doorway and crossed the dark bedroom in 4 strides he did not remember taking. He had been in the study downstairs, on a call he was no longer on, the phone face down on the desk, and the voice on the other end still trying to finish a sentence about a shipment in Busan. The sentence would not be finished tonight. Nothing in Busan was real anymore. Real was the bedroom on the 2nd floor, and the small wet sound the boy made every time the lungs tried to catch hold of the air and missed. The mansion was quiet, because he had made it quiet. 2 stories, 12 rooms, 6 men outside the walls. None of that quiet meant a thing now. He dropped to one knee at the edge of the small bed. The boy's forehead was wet. His blonde hair stuck to his temples in dark strands. His lips a color that had no name in any language Tae-min spoke. "Appa," Ji-hoon whispered. The word came out broken at the middle. Tae-min took the boy's hand. The hand was hot. Too hot. He had felt skin this hot before, in places he would not let his mind go back to, on people who had not lived through the night. "I'm here." His voice was steady, because he made it steady. "I'm here. Open your eyes." The boy opened them halfway and closed them again, like the light hurt. Rain hit the long windows in soft sheets. The lamp by the bed threw a small amber circle on the floor and nothing else. In that circle, on the rug, was the boy's stuffed tiger, fallen on its side, one black plastic eye looking nowhere. Tae-min stood up so fast his knee cracked. He walked to the door. He walked back. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He stood up again. His own breath had become something he could hear. He had 100 phones in this house, 8 cars in the garage, 6 houses in 3 cities, a private clinic in Gangnam whose director would have flown in tonight if asked. None of those mattered because none of them were standing in this room with a stethoscope and a pair of clean, steady hands. None of them could put air back into a boy who had stopped pulling it in. He pressed 2 fingers under the boy's jaw, the way a doctor had once shown him to do, years ago, in a place that was not this house, and counted. The count was wrong. The count was very wrong. Min-jun was already in the hallway. He must have come in without knocking because the door had not opened, and yet he was there, suit jacket open over a black shirt, the small earpiece in his right ear, his face giving nothing away because his face had been trained not to. "Boss, get the car. The doctor is on his way." "Get the car," Tae-min said again, and this time, His voice was the voice from the basement of the old building on Olympic, the voice the soldiers under him heard, once a year, and never forgot. Hospital. The nearest one. The big one. Now. Minjun moved. Taemin knelt back down. He slid one arm under the boy's shoulders and the other under the soft hollow of his knees, and Ji-hoon weighed almost nothing in his arms, almost nothing at all, like the weight of a folded jacket, like the weight of a thing he could lose by setting it down wrong. The boy's head fell against his chest and stayed there. Taemin walked to the door. He walked down the long staircase. He did not look at the portraits on the wall. He did not look at the men who opened doors for him on both sides of the entryway. He walked straight into the rain. The black sedan was already running. Min-jun held the back door. Taemin slid in with the boy still against his chest. The door shut. The car moved before he said move. "It's safer if he stays at the house," one of the men in front said. He was new. He did not yet know what some sentences cost. "We have people. We can bring anyone here." Dangerous for him to be seen at. Dangerous is him staying here. Taemin did not look up. He looked down at the boy's eyelashes, at the small mole on his left cheek, at the way his mouth had fallen slightly open. Drive. The car ate the wet street. The wipers struck a slow, steady beat. The driver took the curves smooth, because the driver had been chosen to take the curves smooth. The city slid past the tinted glass in long, wet smears of red and gold. Storefronts already closed. A man under an awning lighting a cigarette with cupped hands. A taxi at a light, the driver staring straight ahead at nothing. Normal world, doing its normal night, while the only world that mattered to Taemin was breathing wrong against his chest. He felt the small heart through the shirt. Fast, skipping, then fast again. He counted, and stopped counting, because counting was making the thing worse. Taemin lowered his forehead until it touched the top of Ji-hoon's head. "I will be with you the whole time," he said into the boy's hair, in Korean, soft enough that the men in front did not have to hear it. "Even when you do not see me, especially then, you understand?" Ji-hoon did not answer, but his small fingers closed on the lapel of the black coat. Once. Then they let go. The hospital rose out of the rain at the end of the avenue like a white wall with windows. St. Mercy, private, expensive, the kind of place that had valets at the emergency entrance and a marble seal in the lobby. Taemin had picked it weeks ago, from a list, the way other men picked schools. He had not picked it because it was the best. He had picked it because it was the quietest. Discreet billing, discreet records, doctors who had been trained never to ask the second question. None of that mattered tonight. Tonight he would have driven through the front wall of a county hospital with his own car if a county hospital had been 3 blocks closer. The car stopped under the canopy. Min-jun was out before Taemin, opening the door. Taemin stepped out into the rain with the boy in his arms. "You stay with him," he said to Min-jun. "Not a request. Different name. Discreet. No one knows whose son he is. No one. If they ask, he's the son of a businessman. Import-export. Nothing else. Yes, boss. And if anyone in there treats him like he is less than the most important child in this building, I want to know. I do not want it handled. I want to know." "Yes, boss." Taemin walked through the sliding doors. The lobby was bright. Too bright. White tile. A woman at the front desk with a phone against her ear, and a smile already arranged on her face for someone else. A wall-mounted television playing a morning show with the sound off. 2 security guards near the entrance who looked up at him, the way security guards look at men they cannot quite place. He carried the boy past all of it, and stopped at the desk. The collar of his black shirt had fallen open at the throat. The top edge of the black dragon tattoo showed against his clavicle, the long curve of its body climbing out of the white skin of his chest. Neither of the security guards noticed. The receptionist did not look up. "My son cannot breathe." The receptionist held up one finger without looking up. She finished her sentence into the phone. She set the phone down, She turned the screen of her computer toward herself. Sir, I'll need an ID and an insurance card. Taemin did not move. My son cannot breathe. She looked up, finally. She saw the man. She saw the suit. She saw the child. She did not yet see what was in the child's face. She slid a clipboard across the counter with 3 forms attached. If you could fill these out, I'll get someone over to triage as soon as… Now, Taemin said. The word landed on the counter between them, like a coin dropped from a height. Now. Or, I find someone who can. The receptionist's hand froze above the clipboard. Minjun stepped to the counter beside Taemin, slid a black card across it, and said something low in English that the receptionist understood faster than she had understood any of the 3 forms. She picked up the phone. She pressed a button. She spoke in a different voice now, the one a hospital staff member keeps in a drawer for the right kind of guest. A nurse came through the doors at the back. She wore light blue scrubs and white shoes, and a ponytail tied too high on her head. She did not look at the boy first. She looked at the suit first, then she looked at the boy, then she looked at the suit again. Sir, follow me to triage. We'll take a look. A look. Taemin repeated the word as if testing it. He did not move. He's 7. His lips are blue. The nurse's smile tightened on one side. I understand you're worried. Children's bodies can look more alarming than they are. We see this a lot. Let's just get vitals and… Let's just take him to a room. A doctor appeared behind her. White coat. Stethoscope around the neck like a scarf. A pen in his pocket. Thin metal rim glasses. Gray hair cut short and combed back. A face that had not been surprised by anything since 1998. His badge read, Dr. Harrison, Department of Internal Medicine. The badge was on straight. Everything about him was on straight. He looked at the boy from a polite distance, the kind of distance you keep from something you have already decided is not your problem. Sir, the nurse is right. I'm Dr. Harrison. Let's not jump to conclusions. Could just be a virus. Lot of viruses going around. We'll do a quick assessment in triage. There's a waiting area to your… A pair of low heels clicked behind Taemin on the tile. The rhythm of them did not break for the conversation at the desk. Steady, even, the walk of a person who had been told all her life to walk slower and had decided once, finally, not to. They came closer. They stopped. Dr. Harrison. The voice cut through the lobby without raising. Taemin half turned. The woman behind him wore a long white coat over a navy blouse, dark slacks, low-closed shoes, a gray stethoscope around her neck, and a badge on her chest that read, Dr. Z. Murphy, Pediatrics. Her hair was black, long, pulled back into a smooth, low ponytail. Her skin was warm honey. Her eyes were on the child, not on him, not on the doctor, not on the desk. Dr. Murphy, Harrison said. His voice changed half a degree. Not enough to be called change. Enough to be called noticed. We have it covered. You don't, she said. She was already crossing the last steps. She did not look at Harrison again. She looked at the boy in Taemin's arms. She saw the lips. She saw the small rib cage pulling under the wet pajama top. She saw the slack hand. She saw, in 3 quick passes of her eyes, what the other 2 had refused to see in 3 minutes of standing there. How long has he been like this? 2 hours getting worse, Taemin said. He had a fever this afternoon. By 8, he was breathing like this. By 9, he stopped. He did not say the part where Jihoon's chest had paused. Allergies? Asthma? Anything we should know? No diagnosis. He has been quiet today. He did not eat lunch. She set her hand on the boy's forehead. Her fingers were cool and clean and steady. She did not flinch at the heat. She turned her head toward the back. Megan. The nurse with the ponytail blinked. Doctor. Dr. Harrison was going to take… Megan. The name went through the air a second time, and this time it carried. Pediatric resus room. Now. Page respiratory. I want a pulse ox on him before we make it through that door. Move. Megan moved. She moved fast. Dr. Harrison's mouth opened and closed again. Dr. Murphy, with respect, this isn't your patient yet. And, protocol. Dr. Zendaya Murphy turned her head a quarter inch. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. Take him to evaluation now. Are you sure you're not the one exaggerating in the wrong direction, doctor? Harrison's face did a thing that faces do when they have been corrected in front of people whose names they do not know. The color climbed once into his cheeks and went out again. He stepped to the side. He had run out of sentences. He looked at the receptionist as if she might give him one back. She did not. She was already typing the boy's intake into a different screen with a different priority code. Zendaya turned to Taemin. Sir, come with me now. Taemin did not need a second invitation. He walked with her. Minjun fell in 2 paces behind. The 4 of them, woman, man, child, soldier, went through the doors at the back of the lobby into a long, pale corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The doors closed behind them. The morning show on the television in the lobby went on without sound. Zendaya walked fast and steady. Her ponytail did not move. Her ID badge bounced once against her chest with each step. She looked at the boy as she walked, not at the corridor, not at the people who turned to look at her as she passed. What's his name? Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon. She bent her head down so the boy could hear her voice next to his ear. Ji-hoon. Baby, you're going to feel a little cold air on your face in a second. That's me. I'm Dr. Zendaya. You and I are going to breathe together, okay? You don't have to do anything except listen to my voice. The boy did not open his eyes, but the corner of his mouth moved a fraction. Taemin saw it, and his chest did something that had nothing to do with breathing. They turned a corner. The corridor opened up. A second nurse passed them with a clipboard and did not stop. A janitor stepped aside without looking up. Zendaya's badge bounced. Taemin could see her profile from a half step behind, the set of her jaw, the small muscle that worked at the hinge of it. She was angry, not at him, at the building, at the desk, at the doctor in the lobby. At every minute the boy in his arms had spent waiting for someone to be willing to look at him. She was carrying that anger inside her white coat and using it as fuel, because anger used as fuel did not get in the way of clean, steady hands. Megan was holding a door open at the end. Inside the room was a small bed with green sheets, a monitor with cables already snaking out of it, a clear mask attached to a tube that hissed quietly with oxygen, 2 chairs against the wall, and a window that looked out at the parking deck and the rain. Set him here. Zendaya pointed at the bed without turning. Gently, head on the pillow. Good. Megan, oxygen. 4 liters. Pulse ox on the left finger. Let me see the chest. She unbuttoned the small top of the pajama with 2 clean fingers. The boy's ribs pulled in under the skin. Slow, then fast, then slow again. She set the bell of the stethoscope under his collarbone. She closed her eyes. She listened. She moved the bell 2 inches. She listened again. She moved it again. The room held still for her. Even the rain on the window seemed to soften out of respect. Taemin stood at the foot of the bed. He did not realize he had stopped breathing himself until Minjun, beside him, set a hand briefly on his shoulder. He did not realize until that small touch that his whole body had gone rigid as wood. Zendaya straightened. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the saturation number that had just flickered on. She looked at the boy. She did not look at Taemin yet, because she was still working. Megan, I want a chest film and a respiratory panel. Page Dr. Liu for pediatric pulmonology. And someone get me the rest of the team in here, in the next 60 seconds. We're not waiting. Yes, doctor. She finally turned to Taemin. Her eyes were direct, unafraid, and tired in a way she did not let show in her voice. Sir, your son is in respiratory distress. We're going to stabilize him here in this room. I need you to sit in that chair, hold his hand, and let him hear you. The best thing you can do for him right now is be the voice he knows. Can you do that? Taemin, the silent dragon, the man whose name made grown men lower their eyes at parties he never attended. The man who had ordered the closing of a port, and the opening of a war, and the burying of 3 names, looked at the small pediatrician in the long white coat, and nodded once, the way a soldier nods. "Yes, doctor. Good." Her mouth softened at one corner. "Just for him. Just for half a second. Then, we begin." She turned back to the bed. She fitted the small clear mask over Jihoon's nose and mouth, with the gentleness of a person who had done this 1,000 times, and had never let it become 1,000 times. She brushed the wet blonde hair back from his forehead with the back of one finger. She said his name once, low, near his ear. The mask hissed. The monitor beeped. The number on the screen climbed by 1 digit, then by another. In Taemin's pocket, his phone began to vibrate. He did not look at it. For the first time in 19 years, something in the world was more important than the phone in his pocket. He sat down in the chair beside his son. He took the small hot hand in his own. He bent his head until his forehead was almost touching the back of that hand. He did not pray. He had not been taught the words. He did the only thing he knew how to do in front of a thing he could not control. He stayed. He kept his hand around the small hand. He let his breath fall into the slow new rhythm the mask was teaching the boy. In, out, in, out. He had stood over the bodies of men who deserved what he had brought them, and he had not flinched. He flinched now. Every time the small chest paused at the top of a breath, he flinched. Every time it found the next one, something inside him sat back down. Across the room, Dr. Zendaya Murphy watched the saturation number climb. She did not smile yet. She knew this kind of climb. The number could pause. The number could fall back. She kept her eyes on the monitor and her hand on the boy's wrist, and her voice low and even, talking him through it. "Good boy. Keep going. That's it. In through the nose. There you go." Taemin listened to her voice the way drowning men listen to ropes. He did not know her. He did not know the name on her badge would be the name he would carry in his head every day for the next 3 years. He did not know that the small, careful kindness in the way she said "good boy" would replay itself in his memory at 3 in the morning in 5 different cities. He knew only that the chest in front of him was rising, and rising again, and that the woman in the white coat with the steady hands had not yet taken her eyes off his son. Outside the room, in the long, pale corridor, Min-jun stepped aside to take the call he knew was already coming, his eyes on the door behind which his boss had just become, for 1 full hour, only a father. Inside the room, the air had a smell that Zendaya knew by heart. The cold metallic clean of antiseptic mixed with the warm sour scent of a child's fever sweat, and that smell told her, before any monitor did, that she had arrived in time, but barely. The little boy on the bed was not crying anymore, which was worse than crying, because crying meant a body still had energy to protest, and silence in a 7-year-old with a chest moving that fast meant the body was choosing between breathing and complaining, and had already dropped the complaint. His blonde hair, damp, stuck to his forehead in thin, uneven strands. His lips were pale, almost gray at the corners. The pulse oximeter on his small index finger blinked a red number that Zendaya did not like, and the way his nostrils flared with every inhale, that small, desperate widening, told her the accessory muscles in his neck were already doing work the diaphragm could not finish. She moved without hurry, because hurry on the outside frightened sick children, and frightened children breathed worse. She washed her hands at the sink against the wall, the warm water running over her knuckles, and she counted in her head the way she always counted at moments like this: 1 breath in, 2 breaths out, the small private ritual that turned a doctor back into a doctor when the human part of her wanted to scream. She dried her hands on a paper towel, folded it once, dropped it into the bin, and only then did she walk to the side of the bed. She lowered herself. She did not bend at the waist, she lowered. The full controlled crouch that brought her face to the level of his face, her knees almost touching the cold tile, her white coat falling open around her like soft wings. The crotcha on her chest, Dr. Z. Murphy. Pediatrics. caught the overhead light for a second, and threw a small white square onto the bed rail. She made sure the boy could see her eyes before she said anything. She made sure he could see that she was not in a rush. "Ji-hoon-ah," she said, and her voice came out the way water comes out of a slow tap, steady, unhurried, warm enough to lean against. She used the soft Korean diminutive on the end of his name because she had heard the man on the speaker do it earlier, and she had filed the sound away the way she filed everything in pediatrics, the small private words that meant home to a child. "My name is Dr. Zendaya. I'm going to stay right here with you, okay? I'm not going to leave this room. Whatever happens, I am going to be the person you see when you open your eyes." The boy did not nod. He did not have the strength to nod, but his eyelids, those long, thin eyelids that had been half closed for 40 minutes, lifted a small fraction higher, and he looked at her with the exhausted, shocked look of a child who has been waiting to be seen. That look was the only answer she needed. Behind her, Megan O'Brien had already set up the monitor leads, the small round stickers cool against the boy's chest, the wires running like dark vines toward the screen, and the screen had already begun its quiet song of numbers. Oxygen 91, heart rate 148, respirations 42. Each of those numbers, alone, was bad. Together, in a 7-year-old, they were the kind of bad that did not wait politely for a senior consultant to finish his coffee. Zendaya did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on Ji-hoon. "Megan," she said, and the tone of her voice changed by half a degree. Not louder, just sharper at the edges. "Humidified oxygen, 3 liters, soft mask. Get a portable chest film bedside. I do not want him on a stretcher to radiology in this state. Run a CBC, CRP, blood culture, and a viral panel. Start a peripheral line, 24 gauge, on the dorsum of the left hand, gentle. Saline bolus, 10 milliliters per kilo, slow, while I reassess. And call respiratory therapy. I want them in this room in 5 minutes, not 7. "Yes, doctor," Megan said, and there was something in the way she said it, a small, almost imperceptible drop in her shoulders, that suggested she had been waiting for somebody to say those exact sentences, in that exact order. Megan moved. Her sneakers made soft squeaks on the polished floor as she crossed to the supply cart. Zendaya turned her attention back to Ji-hoon. She placed 2 fingers, very lightly, on the small bone at the back of his hand, not to take a pulse, the monitor was already doing that, but to give him a point of contact that was not a needle and was not a cold metal disc. Her fingers were warm. Children noticed warm fingers. "You are doing a very good job of breathing," she told him, which was a lie that doctors told well children, but with sick children, she meant it as instruction, as a small spell, because telling a 7-year-old that he was doing a good job of breathing sometimes convinced the 7-year-old to keep doing it. "I'm going to help you breathe a little easier in a minute. There is going to be a soft mask over your nose and mouth. It blows nice air. It is not scary. It is just nice air. Can you do me a favor? Can you keep your eyes on me while they do it?" His pupils tracked her. Slow, but they tracked her. That was a yes. It was at that exact moment that Minjun Park, standing just outside the doorway in the pale corridor, his black suit a vertical bar of seriousness against the white wall, lifted his phone to his ear and answered the call he had been holding off as long as he reasonably could. He did not speak first. He listened. On the other end of the line, on the other side of the city, in the high, quiet mansion with the amber lamps, the voice of his boss arrived in his ear, flat and low, and stripped of everything except information. "Tell me." Minjun glanced through the doorway. He saw the doctor crouched. He saw her hand on the boy's hand. He saw the monitor settling into a less terrifying rhythm as the oxygen mask began its soft whisper. He chose his words carefully, because he had served Taemin long enough to know that careful words were the only kind that survived a night like this. The doctor took him in personally, American woman, black, Pediatrics. Her name is on the badge, Murphy. She is moving fast and she is calm. They are imaging the chest. They are starting fluids. Oxygen is on. The numbers were bad 10 minutes ago. They are less bad now. There was a silence on the line. Min-jun did not fill it. He knew what was happening in that silence. He knew his boss was sitting somewhere in the long, dim study with the amber lamp at his shoulder, his right hand pressed flat against the dark wood of the desk, his left hand wrapped around the phone, the muscles of his jaw locked so hard that the corner of his cheek would be aching in the morning. He knew that the man on the other end was, for the first time in many years, not entirely sure his body could carry the next 30 seconds. "Put me on video," Taemin said. "Sir, the hospital protocol does not allow Min-jun." The voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Put me on video." Min-jun glanced over his shoulder, both ways down the corridor, and then he stepped back from the doorway, half a step, just enough to be invisible to the room, and he switched the call from voice to video. He angled the phone with the practiced wrist of a man who had spent years showing his employer things from a distance. The small, bright rectangle of the screen filled with Taemin's face, not the public face, not the meeting face, a face Min-jun had seen perhaps 3 times in 7 years, a face with no setting on it at all, hair slightly disordered where a hand had pushed through it. The collar of the black shirt open one extra button as if the throat underneath had needed air, eyes very still and very wet at the corners, the kind of wet that did not become tears because the man would not allow it. Min-jun turned the phone so the lens, just for a second, caught the doorway, caught the angle of the small bed, caught the white coat, the dark, steady hands, the soft mask now snug over Ji-hoon's small face, the blonde hair flattened on the pillow, the small chest, that small, terrible chest, rising, falling, rising. In the mansion, in the long study with the amber lamps that threw warm circles onto the dark wooden floor, Kang Tae-min, the silent dragon, who had moved containers across 3 oceans, who had ended business negotiations with 3 sentences and a glass of water, who had not allowed his own heartbeat to be heard by another human being since the age of 19, sat on the edge of a leather chair he could not feel underneath him, and watched, on a screen smaller than his palm, his only son breathe. He did not blink. He did not move. The room around him was dark except for that one amber circle, the black dragon tattoo at the base of his neck, where the collar of the shirt fell open, rose and fell with his own breathing. But he was not aware of his own breathing. He was aware only of the breathing on the screen. He saw the doctor lean a fraction closer to Ji-hoon. He saw her speak, slow, no urgency in the lips, just steady speech. He could not hear the words because Min-jun had kept the volume low for the room, but he could read the shape of her mouth, the careful round shape of a person who was talking to a child the way a person should talk to a child. He saw her place a small thumb on the back of Ji-hoon's small hand. He saw Ji-hoon's eyes, the eyes that had his mother's exact almond shape, find her and stay on her. Something inside Taemin, something old and locked and made of iron, slipped a single notch. His grip on the phone tightened. The smartphone was a small object in a hand that had been trained to grip much heavier things, and it did not stand a chance. The body of the phone bent first, the thin metal frame on the right side flexing inward against his thumb, and then there was a soft, sharp crack as the glass at the corner of the screen split in a single white line that ran from the top right corner down to the middle. He did not notice. The image kept playing on the cracked half of the screen. He kept watching, and then, very quietly, the way a man underwater might finally remember the surface, Kang Tae-min breathed. It was a single inhale, long, uneven at the start, almost shaking at the chest. But it was a breath that went all the way down to a place in his lungs that he had not used since the night Ji-hoon's mother had died. And when the breath came back out, slow, through his nose, it took with it a weight that Min-jun, watching the small face on the screen, would later say he had thought was permanent. "Min-jun." "Yes, sir." Do not take this call off video. If the camera moves off that room, I will know. Yes, sir. And Min Jun. Yes, sir. Find out the name of every doctor who looked at him before her. Yes, sir. The call did not end. The cracked phone stayed in his hand. He did not put it down. He sat in the amber circle of the lamp, and he watched, through the broken corner of the screen, a woman he had never met press her steady, warm hand against the small hand of his son, and he watched his son's chest, the small, impossibly important chest, find a slower rhythm, and he watched, and he watched, and he did not look away. 40 minutes passed inside the room before the door opened from the outside. The man who came in did not knock. He was tall enough to fill the doorframe without effort, his shoulders square inside an impeccable jaleco, his cabello grisallo cut short and combed with a side part that did not move, and his thin metal-rimmed glasses caught the overhead light in two small white squares that hid his eyes for a second before he tilted his chin and the squares slid away. Around his neck, a navy tie sat over a pale blue dress shirt, and the lanyard at his chest read, in clean engraved letters, Dr. Harrison, Internal Medicine, Senior Consultant. He carried, in his left hand, a tablet, the way some men carry a clipboard like a small shield. He glanced at the bedside monitor. He glanced at the IV line. He glanced at Zendaya. He did not look at Ji-hoon. Dr. Murphy, he said, and there was a particular thinness in his voice. The thinness of a man who had practiced for years the art of making a perfectly polite sentence carry a perfectly impolite question. I understand you took an unscheduled triage decision in the lobby. Are you sure that you are not, perhaps, overreacting? Megan O'Brien, on the other side of the bed, did not turn her head, but her lips, very briefly, pressed together at the corners in the small private way that nurses had developed over centuries for the exact moment when a senior man asked a question that he should not have asked. She held her face. She continued to tape down the small piece of clear plastic over the IV insertion site. Zendaya did not stand up. She finished the small adjustment she had been making to the oxygen mask strap behind Ji-hoon's ear, smoothing it so it would not press a red line into the soft skin under his hair. She made sure the boy's eyes, even glassy as they were still on her, and she gave him a small, slow nod, the same nod a mother gives a child who has been good while a stranger talks in the room. Then, and only then, she stood up. She was not a tall woman, she was not a short woman, but there was a way Zendaya Murphy stood when she had decided to stand a certain way that made the height of other people in the room negotiable. Dr. Harrison, she said, and her voice was warm at the top and steel underneath. The warm part for the child in the bed, and the steel part for the man in the doorway. A 7-year-old child arrived at this hospital with oxygen saturation of 89 on room air, respiratory rate of 42, tachycardia of 148, retractions visible at the supraclavicular and intercostal levels, and a fever of 39.7, sustained for over 6 hours according to the adult who brought him in. The triage note your colleague initialed 40 minutes ago said, quote, possible viral syndrome, observe in waiting area, end quote. She paused. Not for breath. For wait. I do not consider it overreaction, she said, to take a child who is using accessory muscles to breathe out of a waiting area. I consider it Tuesday. Dr. Harrison's jaw moved sideways, a small mechanical adjustment, the kind of movement a man makes when a sentence he had prepared in the corridor stops being useful in the room. His thin metal glasses caught the light again. Dr. Murphy, with respect. With respect, Dr. Harrison, this is not the conversation. The conversation is whether your colleague is going to be reviewed for triaging a febrile child with respiratory distress to a plastic chair. That conversation can happen in the morning. Right now, in this room, I am the attending of record on this patient. His airway is mine, his fluids are mine, his imaging is mine, and his next 4 hours are mine. If you would like to consult with me on internal medicine grounds, I will welcome it at the appropriate time. If you would like to discuss my judgment, the door is behind you, The corridor is long, and the cafeteria has coffee. She did not raise her voice. She did not even lean forward. She delivered each sentence at the exact temperature of a chart entry, and that was, somehow, the part that landed. There was a small silence in the room. The oxygen mask hissed its soft hiss. The monitor ticked its soft tick. Megan O'Brien, behind the IV pole, did not raise her face, but the small, tight muscle at the corner of her mouth twitched, once, in a smile that nobody was allowed to see and that everybody in the room felt. Dr. Harrison adjusted the tablet in his left hand. He did not respond directly. He did the thing that men of his rank had been taught to do when a junior, especially a junior who was a woman, and black, said a true sentence too clearly. He pivoted. "I will note," he said, slowly, in a voice that had returned to its administrative neutrality, "that this is a private family. Adequate financial documentation has not been confirmed at intake. The chest film and the laboratory panel you have ordered are not inexpensive." Zendaya did not blink. "Dr. Harrison," she said, "if you are about to ask me whether a 7-year-old in respiratory distress is going to wait on a credit check, I would like to advise you to ask that question in writing, on hospital letterhead, with your signature at the bottom, so that I can frame it." The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a corridor when a door closes on a man who had thought he was holding the door. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Once, a small dry sound, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Not of agreement, of withdrawal. He turned, the navy tie swinging a small half-centimeter, the thin metal glasses catching one last square of light, and he left the room. The door closed behind him with the soft pneumatic sigh of a hospital door that did not care about anybody's pride. Megan O'Brien did not look up. She tightened the last small piece of tape on the IV. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above the hiss of the oxygen, and it was meant only for Zendaya, but it was meant absolutely. "Dr. Murphy." "Yes, Megan. You handled that very professionally. Thank you, Megan. And I will be telling everyone." Zendaya allowed herself, for the first time since she had crossed the lobby, a small breath out through her nose that was almost a laugh. She did not let it become a laugh, because Ji-hoon was watching her, and a doctor who laughed in front of a sick child sent a confusing message about whether things were serious. She put the small breath away. She knelt down again, slowly, the white coat opening around her, and she touched, very softly, the small warm hand under the IV tape. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "That noisy man is gone. It's just us again. Let's see those numbers come up some more." Ji-hoon's eyes, behind the soft mask, blinked at her. The pulse oximeter on his finger ticked one number higher, then another. The chest, the small, impossibly important chest, rose and fell and rose again, and at the angle of a small camera held by a man in a black suit in the corridor outside, that rise and that fall and that rise traveled, line by careful line, into a cracked phone screen on the other side of the city, where a man with a dragon at the base of his neck was still watching, still not blinking, and still, for the first time in 7 years, breathing all the way down. Down the corridor, Min-jun did not lower the phone. He did not shift his weight. He had been trained, very young, to disappear inside a hallway when his employer needed a hallway to disappear into, and he disappeared now. The only sign he was still there was the small, steady angle of the lens, locked on the doorway, locked on the room, locked on the woman in the white coat, who had not, in any of the last 61 minutes, taken her eyes off the small boy in the bed. Across the city, in a house that had been built to look like a fortress and felt, that night, like a coffin, Kang Tae-min was not sitting down. He had not sat down since the black sedan pulled out of the gate with his son inside, and the small red taillights had disappeared into the wet dark of the avenue, and the iron gate had closed behind them, with that low industrial groan that Tae-min had heard 1,000 times in his life, and had never, until tonight, found unbearable. He was walking. He walked from the long window of the study to the heavy oak door, 11 steps, and from the heavy oak door back to the long window of the study, 11 steps, and the rug under his Oxfords, a dark red rug woven by hand in a country he had not seen in 20 years, was beginning to show the faint, dull line of a man who had measured the same distance too many times in too short a span of hours. The mansion was quiet in the way only very expensive houses can be quiet, with a quiet that was paid for by triple-glazed glass and thick walls and a security system that hummed below hearing. The rain outside threw itself against the windows in long diagonal sheets, and every now and then the wind would change and the rain would hit the glass at a different angle, and the sound would shift, and Tae-min, walking, would lift his eyes to the window for 1 second, as if the rain were a message and he were trying to read it. It was not a message, it was rain. He knew it was rain. He kept lifting his eyes anyway. On the long mahogany desk, behind him, 3 phones lay in a row. The first was his ordinary phone, the one his lawyers and his accountants called. The second was the operational phone, the one only 6 men in the world had the number to, the one that, when it rang because somebody somewhere was either about to die or about to make a great deal of money. The third was a phone he had taken out of a drawer he had not opened in months, a black plastic burner with a cracked screen, a phone he kept because once, a long time ago, he had promised himself that if there were ever a night when he needed to vanish, the first phone he would smash would be that one. None of the 3 phones was ringing. The silence between them was the loudest thing in the room. He stopped at the window. He pressed the heel of his right hand against the cold glass, palm flat, fingers spread, and he leaned his forehead down until his forehead touched the back of his own hand. The glass was so cold it hurt, and he wanted it to hurt. Through the rivulets of water sliding down the outside of the pane, the city blinked in long smeared lines of yellow and red. Somewhere out there, behind one of those small lit windows in one of those tall, pale towers, his son was breathing through a tube, and a stranger in a white coat was deciding whether his son would breathe at all by morning. He had built an empire that could buy any building in this city. He could not, tonight, buy one breath. Aguenta filho, he said, in the language that nobody in this house but him spoke. He said it under his breath, into the glass, and the glass fogged a small oval around his mouth, and the oval grew and shrank with each word. Aguenta, aguenta, Appa is here, Appa is here, even if you cannot see him, Appa is here. The operational phone vibrated once on the desk. He turned so fast he almost slid on the rug. He was across the room in 3 steps. He picked up the phone with the precision of a surgeon picking up a scalpel, and he read the message, and he closed his eyes, and his shoulders fell, not in relief, but in the smaller kind of relief that is only a postponement of fear. Min Jun. The message was 4 words long, in Korean, in the cipher they used. Stable. Doctor still inside. Stable. He read the word 4 times. He read it the way a starving man reads a menu. He turned the phone over in his palm, and turned it back, and read it again. Stable was not safe. Stable was not cured. Stable was a doctor's word, careful, conservative, the kind of word that left every door open and slammed none of them. But stable was also not the word he had been afraid of. The word he had been afraid of had 4 letters and started with a sound he would not even allow himself to think. He sent back 2 characters, understood, stay. Then he put the phone back on the desk and he started walking again. Window, door, window, door. The rug took the small, steady punishment of his Oxfords. He was 31 years old and he was walking like a man twice that age, with his hands clasped behind his back, the way his grandfather used to walk in the courtyard of the old house in Busan, the courtyard where Tae-min, at 7, had learned that the men in his family did not cry where other men could see them. He was not crying now. His eyes were dry. His jaw was locked. The crying, if it came at all, would come later, in a room with no witnesses, and even there he would only allow it for the count of 10 before he stood up again and washed his face and went back to being the man this house required him to be. But inside, in a place under the locked jaw and the dry eyes, something was tearing. He could feel it. It was tearing slowly, with the patient honesty of grief that has not yet been given permission. It was tearing because for the first time in his adult life, he had encountered a problem he could not solve with money or with violence or with the careful, terrifying patience he had built his name on. He could put 200 armed men around that hospital before sunrise. He could buy the hospital. He could buy the street the hospital sat on. He could make the man who had hesitated at the front desk disappear so completely that his own mother would not remember his face. None of those things would put air into the lungs of a 7-year-old boy. None of those things would do what the woman in the white coat, the woman whose name he did not yet know, was, at this moment, doing. He stopped in the middle of the room. He stood very still. He looked at the third phone, the burner, the one he had promised himself he would smash if there ever came a night he needed to vanish. He had been measuring, all evening, in a small, terrible corner of his mind, the exact shape of a plan in which he would walk through the front doors of that hospital with his men behind him and take his son back to this house and find a private doctor and lock the gates and dare the world to come for them. He had measured the plan down to the second. He had measured how long it would take to reach the lobby. He had measured which corridor he would walk through. He had measured the look on the face of the receptionist who had hesitated and had decided, with a coldness that surprised even him, that he would let that face live, because killing it would be too easy and would feel too good, and a man who indulged the easy thing on a night like this was a man who would lose his son. He had measured the plan, and then he had set it down, because he was not, in the end, that kind of father. He was a great many kinds of dangerous man, but he was not, when the chips were on the table and the table was his son's chest, the kind of man who would tear out an IV line because it offended his pride to leave his child in a stranger's hands. The doctor was doing the work. The work was, at this moment, more important than him. That was the truth, and the truth, tonight, was the only thing in this house bigger than him. He sat down. He did not mean to sit down. His legs simply, after the 7th hour of walking, decided to sit down. He found himself in the deep leather chair by the desk, his forearms on his thighs, his head hanging between his shoulders, his hands open and useless in front of him, and he looked at his own hands the way a man looks at tools he no longer trusts. These hands had held his son 3 hours after he was born. These hands had carried his son out of a burning car when Ji-hoon was 4, and the world had decided to remind Kang Tae-min that even a man with 200 soldiers could not put a guard between his child and bad luck. These hands had taught Ji-hoon how to hold chopsticks, how to button a shirt, how to draw the small, uneven dragon Ji-hoon insisted on drawing because Appa's tattoo had a dragon, and so a dragon was the only animal worth drawing. These hands, tonight, had handed his son to a stranger and stayed at the gate, and the stayed at the gate part was the hardest thing these hands had ever done. The black dragon on his chest, under the white shirt with the collar open one button, was hot against his skin. He noticed it the way one notices a wound. He had gotten the tattoo at 19, in the back room of an old master in Itaewon, and it had hurt the way every honest mark a man chooses to carry hurts, and it had reminded him, every morning since, of the promise he had made to himself on the day he buried his father. The promise had been simple: build something that nobody can take from you. He had built it. He had built it brick by brick, body by body, deal by deal, and tonight, the something nobody could take from him was lying in a bed in a hospital across the city, and the only thing standing between him and the worst loss of his life was a woman whose face he had not seen. He stood up. He could not stay in the chair. He walked to the long mahogany side table, where the only photograph in the room sat in a heavy silver frame. The photograph was of Ji-hoon at 4, the boy held up on his father's shoulder, laughing at something off-camera, his small hand fisted in his father's black hair, his blonde hair lit golden by the afternoon sun of the garden, behind the house in Gangnam. Taemin had carried that frame with him through 3 moves. It was the only personal object in this study. He looked at it now and he did not pick it up, because he was afraid that if he picked it up his hands, which had betrayed him by being useless, would shake. The operational phone vibrated again. He did not run this time. He walked 3 measured steps and read, "Doctor remains in room. Boy responding to oxygen. Vitals improving. Vitals improving. Vitals improving." The 2 words made him sit down on the floor. He had not sat on a floor since he was a boy. He sat on the floor of his own study in a suit that cost more than the average annual salary in this country, and he put his back against the side of the mahogany desk, and he closed his eyes, and for 1 long second, he allowed himself to feel the size of the fear he had been carrying. It was enormous. It had teeth. It had taken up so much room inside him that when it shifted, even a centimeter, he could feel the air rush in behind it, and the air rushing in behind a fear that big felt almost exactly like grief, because the body did not, at first, know the difference. He stayed on the floor for 1 minute. He counted. At 60 seconds, he opened his eyes, put both hands on the edge of the desk, and pulled himself up like a man pulling himself out of cold water. He smoothed the front of his suit jacket. He buttoned the button. He walked back to the window. He pressed his forehead, again, to the cold glass. "Doctor," he said, to the rain, to the city, to the woman whose name he did not yet know. "Whoever you are, thank you. Whatever you need from me, in this life or the next, you will have it." He did not mean it as a transaction. He was a man who, in his other life, the life that paid for the rug and the glass and the silver frame, would have meant it as a transaction. He would have meant the cost of every machine, the cost of every favor, the cost of every door he could open. But standing at the window at 4 in the morning with the rain shaking the world outside, he meant it the way an animal means a vow to its own god. He meant that whatever the woman in the white coat had asked of him at that moment, even if she had asked him to walk away from every empire he had built, he would have said yes. He did not know, of course, that the woman in the white coat was, at that exact moment, sitting on the small stool beside his son's bed, with her white coat unbuttoned at the throat and her stethoscope in her lap, leaning forward to listen, one more time, to the soft, uneven breathing that was now, for the first time in 6 hours, less uneven than before. He did not know that she had not eaten. He did not know that she had 2 more patients on her round, and that she had asked Megan, very quietly, to push them to the next nurse on rotation, and that the next nurse on rotation had said yes without a word, because the next nurse on rotation had worked enough nights with Dr. Murphy to know that when Dr. Murphy stayed with one child, the child was the kind of child who needed the doctor to stay. He did not know that on the small white whiteboard above his son's bed, in Zendaya's even handwriting, there was now a list of 7 things, written in green marker, that she had personally signed for, including a specific antibiotic that the hospital pharmacy had said would take 24 hours to source, and that she had, 2 hours ago, threatened a supply manager into delivering within 90 minutes. He did not know any of that, but he felt it. He felt it the way men of his line had always felt the things they could not see. Somewhere out there in the soaked dark, a stranger was holding his son inside her decisions, and the decisions were good, and the night was, slowly, beginning to lose its teeth. The phone vibrated a 3rd time. He had stopped counting how many minutes between the messages. He read, "Doctor will remain through end of shift. Has refused replacement." He read the line 3 times. "Has refused replacement." He read it once more, because the words were doing something inside him that he was not, yet, ready to name. Doctors in private hospitals did not refuse replacement at 4 in the morning for a child whose family name had not yet been confirmed at the front desk. Doctors in private hospitals at 4 in the morning were either ordered to stay by money or relieved by protocol. There was a third reason a doctor stayed, and the third reason was the reason that, in the quiet study with the rain on the glass, made Kang Tae-min set the phone down very gently, like a man setting down something he was suddenly afraid to break. He turned his head toward the photograph on the side table. He looked at his son's small face, 4 years old, laughing. "Someone is keeping watch over you," he said, in Korean, almost soundless. "Appa cannot be there, but someone is keeping watch over you, and Appa will not forget her name." He did not yet know her name. He would know it within the hour. Min-jun, who had been told by the doctor herself, in the corridor, with that calm, careful directness she used on people who carried operational phones, had already written it on the inside of his own forearm with a black ballpoint pen, because Min-jun had understood, somewhere between the elevator and the 3rd floor, that the boss was going to ask for the name, and that the boss was going to remember the name for the rest of his life, and that a name that important should not be allowed to be lost between a screen and a battery. But that was an hour from now. For the next hour, in the long study with the dark red rug and the 3 phones in a row and the rain on the triple glazed glass, Kang Tae-min, the man they called the Silent Dragon, did not move. He stood at the window with his forehead against the cold and his hand flat against the glass, and he kept his eyes open, because every time he closed them, he saw his son's small chest the way it had been at the moment the sedan pulled out of the gate. That thin, uneven movement, that warning. He kept his eyes open and he watched the rain, and he counted, in his head, the same small private count he had once heard a doctor count under her breath in a hallway he had never walked. 1 breath in, 2 breaths out, 1 breath in, 2 breaths out. As if by counting on his end of the city he could give her 1 extra breath on hers. Outside, the sky stayed black for a long time. Then, very slowly, the kind of slowly that only people who have not slept can see, the black began to soften at the edges. It was not light yet. It was the rumor of light, the suggestion of light, the part of the night that knows light is coming and begins, almost ashamed, to admit it. Taemin watched the rumor of light arrive over the city, and he allowed himself, for the first time in 6 hours, the smallest exhale, an exhale so small it did not even fog the glass. Across the city, in a small white room on a quiet floor, the woman in the white coat watched the chest of a 7-year-old boy lift and fall in a rhythm that was, finally, the rhythm she had been waiting for, and she leaned forward, and she touched the back of 1 finger to his cheek, very gently, and she whispered, in a voice nobody else was meant to hear, "You did it, baby. You did it. Just keep going. We have all the time in the world." The boy did not wake, but his small fist, which had been clenched on the white sheet for 6 hours, opened, 1 finger at a time, and his hand rested flat. The pulse oximeter on his index finger blinked a number that, this time, made Zendaya nod once, slowly, and close her eyes for half a second of the kind of private gratitude doctors learn, very early, to keep entirely to themselves. Down the corridor, behind a column, Min-jun lifted his phone, took 1 photograph of the doorway from a respectful distance, and sent it, without caption, to the only phone in the world that would understand what it was a photograph of. The image arrived in the study across the city at exactly 6:17 in the morning. Taemin, still at the window, felt the phone vibrate against the wood of the desk behind him. He turned. He walked. He picked up the phone. He looked at the photograph for a long time. In the photograph, taken from the angle of a man who knew how to make himself small, the doorway of the small white room was visible, and inside the doorway, only the shoulder and the back of a head were visible. The shoulder in a white coat, the head bowed over a bed. Taemin could not see her face. He did not need to see her face. He set the phone down on the desk, beside the silver frame, beside the photograph of his son at 4, and he placed the two images side by side, the laughing boy in the golden garden and the white shoulder in the white corridor, and he stood over them with both hands flat on the desk, and his head lowered, and his eyes closed, and for the count of 10, in a room where nobody could see him, he finally allowed his shoulders to shake. At the count of 10, he opened his eyes, he straightened, he buttoned the top button of his jacket, he picked up the operational phone, and he sent Minjun one message, 3 words long, the only 3 words a man like him was, at that moment, capable of writing. Find her name. Then he turned back to the window and watched the rumor of light become light, and waited, the way a man waits when the only thing he can do is wait, for the next message, the next breath, the next sign that the world, for one more day, was going to let him keep his son. By the time the rumor of light became the kind of full hospital daylight that erases the small private mercies of the night, Ji-hoon Kang had slept for 4 uninterrupted hours, and that was the kind of victory that does not make it into any chart, but that every nurse on the floor felt in her shoulders the moment she walked past room 214 and saw the small blonde head turn toward the window instead of the ceiling. The boy was not well. Well was a word for later. But he was no longer the small flickering candle that had come through the doors at midnight with a stranger's hand on his back. The candle had become a low, steady flame, and a low, steady flame was a thing a doctor could work with. And the doctor, when she finally stood up from the small stool beside the bed and stretched the long, aching length of her back, allowed herself the smallest private smile she had permitted her face in 12 hours. Zendaya stepped out of the room. She went to the small alcove at the end of the pediatric corridor, fed the vending machine 2 crumpled bills, pressed the buttons for black coffee and plain crackers, and stood there with the paper cup warming her hands, breathing, for the first time since midnight, the long, slow breath of a person who has stopped running. Megan found her there. The red-headed nurse leaned her shoulder against the wall and did not speak for a long moment. After a while, Megan said, "He is going to be okay." Zendaya nodded. Once, the small, careful nod of a woman who does not yet trust the word okay. "He is going to be okay today," she said. "Tomorrow we will see about tomorrow." Megan smiled into the wall. "I will take that. So will I." The day shift began, the hospital filled with its usual choreography of beeping machines and rolling carts, and Dr. Zendaya Murphy, on 3 hours of sleep, walked the rest of her rounds the way she walked every morning of her life, stethoscope around her neck, hair pulled into its low, tight bun, her quiet authority leading her into rooms the way a small, steady boat leads itself into known water. She did not, however, leave Ji-hoon. Between every patient she circled back. A child pulled out of a bad night was not a closed file. He was an open page on which the next hours would write whatever they pleased, and Zendaya had learned, a long time before, that the only way to write what you wanted on that page was to stay close enough to hold the pen yourself. It was on the 4th circle back, late morning, that she sat down properly in the chair beside his bed and did the thing that was not on any chart and not in any protocol, and that she did, with certain children, only when she felt that the chart had carried them as far as the chart could, and now what was needed was something a chart could not carry. She put the file down. She crossed one leg over the other. She rested her hands in her lap. She looked at the small blonde boy in the blue pajama, and she said, in a voice that was different from her doctor voice, a voice that was slower, warmer, more tilted toward the way a person speaks to a friend, "Ji-hoon. Do you like castles?" The boy turned his head. The oxygen tube was still under his nose. His eyes were the tired, bright eyes of a child who has been through a long tunnel and is now, surprised, finding daylight on the other side. He did not answer in English at first. He answered in a small, careful Korean word, and then he caught himself, and then, in the slightly accented English of a boy who has been raised between 2 languages, he said, "Castles with the secret passages." Zendaya let her face soften into the kind of smile that did not belong to her hospital. Castles with the secret passages, she repeated. Those are the only good kind. Ji-hoon nodded very seriously. The other kind are just buildings, he said. He had clearly thought about this. He had clearly held opinions about castles for some time. Zendaya laughed, quietly, the small private laugh she did not give her colleagues. You are exactly right, she said. The other kind are just buildings. So tell me about the secret passages, he told her. He told her about the passages that ran behind the walls and came out behind the suits of armor, and the passages that went under the courtyard and came up in the stables, and the passages, which were the best kind, that had small round doors with iron rings and led to rooms full of books and old maps with dragons in the corners. He spoke for 10 minutes. He did not know that he had not spoken 10 consecutive minutes to anyone in 3 days. Zendaya knew. Zendaya let him speak. When he finally slowed down and his small chest, under the blue pajama, lifted and fell with the soft new rhythm of a boy who had remembered, for a moment, that he was a boy, Zendaya leaned forward, her forearms on her knees, and lowered her voice, as if she were about to tell him a thing not everyone in the hospital was allowed to know. Ji-hoon, she said, can I tell you a secret about the medicines we are giving you? He nodded. The eyes were huge. The mouth was a small, careful line. He was already inside the story before she had told it. The medicines we are giving you, she said, are not really medicines. The medicines we are giving you are missions. Every little tube, every little pill, every little patch on your arm, it is a mission, and the mission is a hero mission, and the hero is you. She paused. Every time we hang a new bag on that pole, it is the mission room of the castle sending you a new mission. And every time you finish the bag, you finish the mission. And every time you finish the mission, the castle gets one passage stronger. She tapped, gently, the side of his small hand. You are not a sick boy, Ji-hoon. You are a knight on assignment. The assignment is to breathe. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the bag of saline above his bed, as if he were seeing it for the first time. He looked at his own arm with the small, clear taped line. He looked, last, at her, and the look in his eyes was the look of a child being handed back a thing he had not realized had been taken from him, which was the right to pretend, the right to make the bad room into a story room, the right to refuse to be only a patient. He said, very seriously, then I have to finish them, all of them. Zendaya said, equally seriously, yes, all of them. Otherwise, the castle does not get the passage. He nodded. The nod was the nod of a small commander, accepting the burden of his post. And then he smiled. He smiled for the first time since he had been pushed through the front doors at midnight. The smile was a small, uneven boy smile that pulled the oxygen tube slightly out of place and that he had to push back into place with his small free hand. And Zendaya, who had watched a great many children smile after a great many bad nights, found that this particular small smile lodged somewhere under her ribs in a place that was not her doctor place. Megan was the one who saw it from the hallway. Megan was the one who saw it from the hallway. Megan was the one who saw it from the hallway. Megan was the one who saw it from the hallway. Megan was the one who saw it from the hallway, the one they used to document wound dressings and rashes for the file, and took, before her hand could second-guess itself, a single photograph of the doctor and the small blonde boy, and the smile. She did not, at that moment, know exactly why she had done it. She told herself she had done it for the file. She also, after, slid the photograph into her own scrubs pocket, because there was something in the photograph that did not belong in a hospital file, and Megan had been a nurse long enough to know that the things that did not belong in a file were sometimes the things that mattered most. The photograph, in a way Megan could not have imagined, did not stay in her pocket. It left the pocket 2 days later, when the discharge folder for Ji-hoon Kang was being assembled, and a second copy of every photograph in his record was attached, by quiet protocol, to the family file that the hospital prepared for parents who had been unable to be present during the worst of an admission. The folder was handed, with a small bow, to a man in a black suit who had come to collect the boy, and the man in the black suit, whose name was Min Jun Park, had carried the folder back across the city, through the long iron gate, up the wide staircase, and into the silent study, where his employer was waiting at the long window, with his hands clasped behind his back, the way his grandfather used to clasp them in the courtyard in Busan. Kang Tae-min opened the folder at the desk. He opened it slowly, because everything that came out of that hospital was, at that hour, sacred to him. He read the discharge summary. He read the medication list. He read the follow-up schedule, which had been written, he noted, in the same even green handwriting that had filled the whiteboard above his son's bed. He read the small typed name at the bottom of the report, Dr. Z. Murphy, Pediatrics, and he ran the tip of his index finger under the name once, the way a man underlines, in private, the name of a person he intends to remember for the rest of his life. He turned the page. The photograph was there. It was a small thing, 4x6, printed on the cheap hospital printer with the slightly orange tone of an exhausted ink cartridge. And in the photograph, his son was smiling, and a woman in a white coat was leaning forward toward him, with her hands on her knees and her face soft, in a way that the rest of the folder did not say a single word about. And Kang Tae-min, who had not cried in 11 years, who had not cried at his own father's funeral, who had not cried the night they pulled Ji-hoon out of the burning car at the age of 4, stood at his desk in a suit that cost what most men in this country made in a year, and felt his eyes burn. He did not allow them to do more than burn. He inhaled, slowly, through the nose, the way he had taught himself to inhale when an inhale was the only thing standing between him and a thing he could not afford to do. And he closed the folder, and he placed his palm flat on top of it for the count of 10, and he opened it again only because Min-jun, who had been standing 2 steps behind him, cleared his throat. "Sir," Min-jun said, "there is one more thing." Tae-min did not turn. "Speak." "The billing," Min-jun said. "I went, as you instructed, to settle in full." The cashier was confused. She said the file was already partially marked. A portion of the treatment, the part involving a specific antibiotic and 2 of the diagnostic imaging procedures, has not been billed. It has been categorized as an internal program, pediatric compassionate care. Tae-min did turn, now, slowly. The light from the long window fell across one side of his face and left the other side in shadow, the way it had fallen across his grandfather's face in a photograph he kept in a drawer he did not open. Internal program. Yes, sir. Whose program? Min-jun did not blink. Dr. Murphy's, sir. She designed it. She runs it. It is a small fund inside the hospital that she has been signing off on personally for the past 2 years. The administrator I spoke with said, off the record, that they have been trying to shut it down for 8 months. She has been keeping it open. He paused. She did not bill us, sir, because in her program, families do not get billed. Tae-min looked at his second-in-command for a long time. His face did not change. The only thing that changed was a small muscle in his jaw, the one that, when it tightened, was the only warning a man working for Kang Tae-min was ever going to get that the world had just shifted under his feet. The muscle tightened. It held. It released. He turned, very slowly, back to the folder. He opened it again. He looked at the photograph again. He spoke without looking up. She did not know who he was. No, sir. She did not know who I was. No, sir. She still does not. She did this, Tae-min said, because he was a child who could not breathe. Yes, sir. There was a silence in the room that was not the silence of an order being formed. It was the silence of a man rearranging, in the cold quiet of his own ribs, the map of his obligations. Kang Tae-min had, in his life, accumulated debts that ran to several countries and several generations. He paid them the way he had been taught to pay them, with precision, with weight, with the cold understanding that a debt unpaid was a door left open. He had never, in his life, owed anything to a person who did not know they were owed. He stood at the desk, and he turned the new debt in his hands like a small, heavy stone, and he understood, with the clarity that came to him only on certain mornings, that this debt was the kind that could not be settled by any of the ordinary instruments of his world. He could not pay her. She had refused, in advance, to be paid. He could not threaten her. She had given him nothing he could leverage. He could only, he understood, watch her, and learn her, and find, in the slow accumulation of who she was, the shape of the thing that would, eventually, be the only thing he could possibly offer her in return. "Min-jun," he said, "Sir, you will, from this morning forward, prepare for me, every Monday, a single page. On that page, you will tell me what Dr. Murphy is doing in her hospital. You will tell me, in particular, when the men above her are giving her trouble. You will not speak to her. You will not approach her. You will not, under any circumstance, allow her to know that any page is being prepared. Do you understand me?" "I understand, sir." "And the program? The pediatric compassionate care?" "Yes, sir." "You will find out what it costs, per year, to keep open. You will find out, quietly, who has been trying to shut it down. You will not act on either piece of information yet. You will bring me the numbers, and you will let me sit with the numbers, and when I am ready, I will tell you what to do." He paused. "Do not breathe a word of this fund to anyone. Do not breathe a word of her name to anyone. If anyone in this house, in this family, in this city, learns that the boy was treated by a woman, they will assume, because they are the men I have made them, that the answer is a gift large enough to embarrass her. That is not the answer. That is the wrong answer. The right answer will come later. The right answer will come when I have understood her." Min-jun bowed, the small, precise bow of a man who has been carrying his employer's instructions for a decade and a half, and who, in 15 years, had never seen this employer use the word understand about another human being. He did not comment on the word. He closed the folder. He left the room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him with the soft authority of a door that had been hung by a craftsman, and Kang Tae-min stood alone in the study, with the photograph and the rain, and a small new thing inside his ribs that he did not yet have a word for, and that would, in the 3 years that followed, slowly, patiently, against every instinct his life had trained into him, learn its name. Outside the long window, the rain had stopped. The first true sun of the morning was breaking, low and gold, across the city, and somewhere across that city, a small blonde boy was being lifted into a black sedan with a discharge folder on his lap, and he was holding the folder very carefully because he had been told it was important, and he was, all the way home, peeking inside it because in the back of the folder, just behind the paperwork, somebody at the hospital had slipped, against every protocol, a small folded piece of paper with a green marker drawing of a castle on it, and underneath, in even handwriting, the words, "First mission complete. The passage is open. Keep going, night." The seasons turned. Rain became wind. Wind became the soft, heavy gray of a long winter. The gray lifted. The air began to smell of wet earth instead of wet stone, and that was spring. And spring became a heat that hung in the streets like a held breath, and the heat became a honey-colored fall, and the fall became rain again, and then it had been 1 year, and then 2, and then 3. The small blonde boy who had walked, once, into a hospital lobby on legs that did not entirely belong to him was now a taller boy with the same blonde hair, slightly darker at the roots, with a healthier color in his cheeks and a sturdier step, sitting in a pediatric exam room in a white polo and light jeans, swinging his legs from the edge of the exam table because his legs were now long enough to swing. 3 years had passed inside the walls of the hospital with the small, steady rhythm of a clock that does not know who is watching it. Ji-hoon Kang had come back, again and again, for the long, careful program of follow-ups his case required. Blood work every 3 months at first, and then every 6, imaging once a year, the gentle, slow process of a chronic condition being walked, year by year, toward something that could almost be called ordinary. He had come back at 7.5, at 8, at 9, and now, at 10, with a file at the nurse's station that had grown from a thin envelope to a binder thick enough to require its own shelf. The binder had a green sticker on the spine. It meant, to the people on the floor, that the case was a Murphy case, and a Murphy case did not get reassigned without the kind of conversation nobody had ever been brave enough to start. 3 years had passed, also, inside the locked study in the mansion across the city. Every Monday, without exception, a single page had been delivered to the long mahogany desk in a plain manila envelope, and the man who lived in the study had read each page with the patience of a man reading scripture. He had read about Dr. Murphy's hours. He had read about her patients. He had read about her small, slow expansion of the pediatric compassionate care program, from a fund that paid for 1 antibiotic to a fund that, by the end of the 2nd year, was paying, in part, for 3 categories of long-term care for children whose families could not afford the long part. He had read about her 2 academic papers. He had read about her running, 4 mornings a week, the same park, the same gray hoodie. He had read about her coffee, black, from the same corner cart. He had read, in particular, about the slow, steady pattern of resistance to her program from a man named Caldwell and a man named Harrison, and about every meeting in which she had defended the fund and walked out of the room with the program still open. He had read these particular reports more than once. He had not, in 3 years, set foot in the hospital. He had not, in 3 years, spoken her name aloud to anyone but Minjun. He had not, in 3 years, allowed himself the indulgence of even one small visit, even one small glance through a corridor window, even one small accidental crossing in an elevator. He had decided, on the morning he had first opened the folder, that he would not approach this woman until he had earned, by the discipline of his own waiting, the right to stand in front of her without owing her so much that the standing itself would be an insult. He had set the bar of that earning very high. He was a patient man. He was also, that morning, in the spring of the year his son turned 10, beginning, for the first time in 3 years, to feel the bar of that earning move beneath his feet, because the page Minjun had brought him that Monday had ended with a single sentence that Taemin had read 3 times, then folded the page very carefully, then placed in the locked top drawer of his desk, then taken out again 2 minutes later, then read once more. The sentence had been short. It had said, "Hospital administration has formally placed Dr. Murphy's compassionate care program on the agenda of next month's board meeting, under the heading, Programs Under Review." The patient time had ended. The waiting time had ended. Somewhere, the slow tide that had carried Kang Taemin for 3 years had reached, at last, the shore. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever helped someone for 3 years without expecting a single thing back, K-fam? Have you ever been the only person in the room who refused to look away when a child needed to breathe? Mark my words, K-fam. The people who save us rarely know who we are when they do it. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about silent kindness, hidden fatherhood, and dignity restored, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.